Howdy folks, it's Jerry coming at you on your computer screen or wherever else you might be watching from. I am just heading home from Ryan's, and I figured I'd stop in with a little movie review, because guess what? There's a big old movie out this weekend. That's right, you guessed it, I'm talking about Ant-Man, the newest entry into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the end of Phase 2, which a lot of people don't realize. I didn't realize until, forgive me for forgetting, but somebody corrected me. Ant-Man is the end of Marvel's Phase 2. Not the Avengers Age of Ultron, but Ant-Man, because apparently Ant-Man is going to be integral to the rest of the MCU for here on out, or at least for Phase 3. So let's get into this. Ant-Man is kind of your traditional origin story of a superhero movie. You know, it's about a pretty competent thief who's hit a run of bad luck. He's just getting out of jail. He's divorced from his wife. You know, he's not allowed to see his daughter. You know, things just ain't working out for Scott, man. And along the way, as circumstances become more dire, as his job at Baskin Robbins isn't working out, he turns back once again to a life of crime. And it is through this that he comes in contact with Hank Pym, the Ant-Man. Let's start out, you know, the cast is usually a good place to start. I really like... So how is this movie? Let's get into it. The guy next to me has a giant penis. That's why his car is so loud. So that you can hear his penis coming wherever he may roam. Anyhow, how's this movie? Well, let's start, I feel like it's appropriate to start with Paul Rudd, because, you know, people are wondering about this movie. It's kind of a kooky concept, and it's kind of an interesting choice for who should play the lead role in something like this. Perhaps a sensible choice for the more comedic aspirations of this movie, but, you know, given that this is a Marvel Cinematic Universe film, it's a little interesting to see Paul Rudd starring in something like this, you know, them going into a more overtly comedic zone. And I think Paul Rudd is good in this. I'm happy to report back. I think Paul Rudd does a good job. He plays the character very earnestly. He's got a sense of humor, but he's a likable guy, and his motives are likable, and he's super competent at what he does. Even though he's on the wrong side of the law, you can get behind him. He's not a Tony Stark type. Like, he's got, you know, a wit about him and a sense of humor, but he's not a narcissistic train wreck. So it's a nice contrast there, and I think Paul Rudd handles this role really well, and I'm happy to see him further down the line as the Phase 3 of Marvel Cinematic Universe progresses. Michael Douglas is in this as well. Michael Douglas plays Hank Pym, the original Ant-Man who's passing along the mantle, and I gotta say, he's great in this. I mean, you forget about Michael Douglas sometimes, but he showed up in this, and I really like the way he played this. I think he does a great job. He's really believable. He brings a certain level of charm, but also just a certain level of gravity, and you believe this guy. Really well done on his part. I mean, I think Michael Douglas is great in this. You know, he's definitely a highlight. Then we have Corey Stoll, who you may recognize from things like House of Cards, playing the villain, and I like him in this movie too. He's playing a villain, for sure. Like, you can tell this guy's evil the second he walks on screen. But what I do appreciate about him is that he is really committed to this, to the point where in one scene, when part of his plan is foiled, you can actually see, like, his eyes are watering, he's tearing up. Like, you can tell that even though this guy is off, you know, clearly this guy is gonna do some unsavory things. Corey Stoll's really invested in it, and that goes a long way. And it helps that the script actually does acknowledge, you know, that this character is sort of mentally unstable. You know, through the Michael Douglas character, they sort of address that this guy is a bit unbalanced. And that goes a long way, because, you know, we've had a lot of villains who are just kind of evil just cuz. And it was nice just to have a little bit of a human element in this guy. Moving forward, I mean, the supporting characters are what bring the most pure fun to this, especially when you get down to Michael Pena, T.I., and David Dastmalchian. Those guys bring so much color to this movie, and they're not in it a whole ton. There's kind of a period where they disappear for a while, but they play into the plot in really fun ways. You know, they help this to feel more like a heist movie. Marvel's good at crashing genres together with superhero to keep things interesting, and those guys are part of the heist, you know. You've got this sort of tech-savvy computer guy played by David Dastmalchian. You've got T.I., who's like the wheelman, you know, the getaway driver, and then you've got Michael Pena, who's sort of your inside guy pulling strings while the heist is being done. And all three of those dudes have very different personalities, but they're really fun and funny, and it's refreshing in a way to see a group of thieves who are just so good-natured and kind of friendly. Like, it brought a nice dose of heart and personality to this that's just different from what we're used to getting. You know, I like anti-heroes and I like gruff characters, but for this movie it seemed really nice to have Paul Rudd and his group as just kind of the most good-natured thieves ever. Like, I just like that about this, you know, it kind of gave it a plucky personality that I can get behind. You also have Bobby Cannavale and Judy Greer as Scott's ex-wife and her new beau, who, you know, Scott is no stranger to. They're both good, and in fact, I like the way they played Bobby Cannavale because that is an easy character to be cheap with. That's an easy character to turn into just a dick. And they managed to make things work because while you do like Paul Rudd, you get where this guy's coming from, and while you get where this guy's coming from, you see that he's kind of a dick in a realistic way. You know, you get their friction and you get why. And Judy Greer is good. I mean, it's kind of the same role she played in Jurassic World. Like, she's good at it. Like, I'm glad she's here. It's a bummer to kind of always have her showing up as, like, side wife. But, you know, it's always nice to see her. And last but not least, I'm sure you're saying to yourself, Jerry, you're forgetting someone, and you're wrong, and you're right. Reverse that. I saved Evangeline Lilly for last just because I really especially appreciated what she did here, and I wanted to bookend it that way. So, I really liked what they did with Evangeline Lilly. I mean, off the bat, I think her performance is spot on. She does a really good job, especially because some of those scenes are a bit truncated. For as much trouble and controversy as there has been about Marvel and their struggle to bring a solid female character to screen, I was so thrilled to see this because I think they pulled it off well with her. She is clearly capable. The movie never feels the need to oogle her or cheapen her, and when it comes right down to it, she is the most well-equipped, capable character from the onset of this movie. She can clearly take care of herself, and Paul Rudd even points out at one point that she's the one you're looking for, not me. You know, like, she's the one who ultimately ends up training Paul Rudd. Michael Douglas does too, but she does a lot of the physical training, and, you know, you've all seen it in the trailer. She's showing him how to punch, and she just decks him right in the face. And as that montage continues, they allow the two of them to fight, and they both land hits on each other, and it's never made a deal out of. The movie doesn't force her into low-cut spandex or anything like that, and it just allows her to be a character with some real character moments, and I really appreciated that. I'm hoping to see her in the future. Moving forward into the meat of this movie, here's sort of where I'm at right now. I really enjoyed it, and there are some things that made me feel very warm. You know, I had moments watching this where I felt like I was watching the first Spider-Man. You know, I haven't had one of those moments in a while because, especially Marvel, like, you know, the stakes are getting higher, as they always do in superhero movies. And, you know, Captain America Winter Soldier I really liked, and the Avengers movies I really liked, and those had humor, but they're also very dark. There's a lot at stake. There's a lot of heavy stuff going on. And this one had the wonder again, and it's hard to get back to that because we're all so accustomed to it, especially when they do the scenes where he's learning the suit and learning how to do the different powers. Those were just so much fun, and it kind of took me back to something like a Spider-Man. And that's another place where the humor tends to shine in this movie. Now, I think there's a problem we have right now with superhero movies because they are so fixed in the marketplace and we get so many of them that I feel like the first act has become something that is a little tricky because everybody knows the beats of most of these origin stories, so I get the desire to brush past it, but it does kind of make your movie lopsided. And as I was sitting through the first half hour or so of this movie, I did find myself sort of being like, you know, I know that you know that we know, but I kind of wish it could have just unfolded more like a natural movie. A lot of the scenes in the first act are very quick. It's almost like a yeah approach to telling those parts of the story, to setting things up. Not that there aren't cool moments or funny beats, but the introductions are all really quick. We cut in for the obligatory 6-line scene where the daughter is expressing to her mother how much she wants dad to come back. Like, there are a lot of really blocky, like, expositional moments in the first part of the movie. So I think first acts are something we have to figure out again for superhero movies because it just felt a little rushed to me. And that's something that does kind of go throughout the movie. There are a lot of scenes I just wish had continued a bit or had some room to breathe. We don't need to clip along quite so fast. And I know it's a 2-hour movie, and I have complained about runtime before, but there are just a number of scenes that feel truncated. Thankfully, most of them are saved by the cast, but, you know, that is a legitimate complaint about this movie throughout, but most especially in the first act. That's your character right there. That's the stuff we have to care about, and it's to the movie's credit that by the end, I did actually care about Paul Rudd and his daughter and that dynamic of the family. The ideas of those scenes and the elements in those scenes are good, but compared to other scenes that get to go on longer, they kind of feel like afterthoughts or feel like they were the first things to get pared down when time was needed. Estranged from my daughter, you know, estranged from my wife, like that's a very now sort of action movie, like, oh, hey, here's a reason why we care about him because he cares about something kind of story. And it does work here. Partly just because the actors are so earnest with it. They really sell it, and I liked it this time around, so props to them for that. The movie really finds its legs when Paul Rudd finally gets in the suit and shrinks for the first time. Like, that's when the movie sort of settles on a groove. And that's also when some of the most fun and interesting stuff happens, because, you know, part of what's cool about superhero movies is that they show you something magnificent and spectacular, and it's nice to see something new again, you know? Because lately, a lot of the fantastical isn't as exciting just because there are only so many ways to make superhero fresh, and this was a cool power that, you know, played with the laws of physics, so it was something new to see. This is kind of a quirky idea, and the movie acknowledges that, you know. For the first part, you're kind of like, oh, this is a little silly, like he's running around with ants and stuff, and they got ants doing all these things. But it does a good job acclimating you, and that's some of the most fun and enjoyable stuff about this movie, is when they're playing with size and scope. Some of the macro photography is really cool and kind of gorgeous at a certain point. And also, they get some humorous mileage out of that, you know. You've all seen in the trailer that moment where it's like this big train crash as they're fighting on the tracks, and it's just a toy. Like, that stuff was really fun to me. One thing I really appreciate about Marvel, especially, you know, moving forward, is that they seem like they want to marry each of these movies to a different genre as well as superhero movie. This time around, they mix superhero with heist, and I really enjoyed that they brought that element into this. It gives the superhero formula just a little added freshness. However, overall, just as a film, I do think that this movie struggles a bit when it comes to tone. There are definitely some good instances of comedy, good moments of action, some really cool heist sequences, and cool superhero stuff along the way as well. But I feel like the tones that work in this movie only ever come together and fuse intermittently, especially with some of the humor that's given to Paul Rudd specifically. This movie is kind of a good example to me anyway of clashing approaches to humor. There's your joke-based comedy, which is, you know, you just wrote somebody a funny quip, and then there's character comedy, which simply comes from characters reacting the way that character would react. And so in this movie, I feel like the character comedy is really good. That's the stuff that felt the most natural and that made me laugh the hardest. All the stuff with Paul Rudd's crew, it's like those guys are kind of kooky characters, and because of that, because the movie establishes them as these kind of quirky guys, just their worldview is funny, and the way they behave is funny, and that stuff really works. But there are times, just kind of at the end of scenes, it feels like they'll tack on a joke or like a funny quip for Paul Rudd to say, and those were really hit and miss for me. Like, none of them were bad, but a lot of them just didn't hit and kind of felt a little awkward. So that's just kind of a seam where things sort of start to come apart a little bit. Sometimes the humor and the heist and the superhero and the action are all working together, and other times they're sort of coming apart, or one is being favored more than the other in a way that doesn't quite work. I know I'm gonna take flack for this, but that's the one place where I really miss Edgar Wright on this. He's credited with the script and stuff like that, him and Joe Cornish. I don't know how far this draft is from theirs, but that's where I really miss Edgar Wright, is I feel like had Edgar Wright been able to direct this movie, he's a master at spinning several genre plates at once and keeping them all going. It's like if you watch Hot Fuzz has elements of action, comedy, horror, various things, and that movie, those all fuse. Watching this, I felt sort of the weight of his absence every time the genres would come apart, basically. Peyton Reed definitely brings some chops to the table. There is some good timing here. There are some really creative visual sequences, especially when Michael Pena is like telling Paul Rudd the intimate details of like what he heard from this guy who's got a plan about this heist. There are some really fun, clever little things thrown in, but ultimately I feel like this movie would have sung if it had been done by Edgar Wright, just because that guy has such an inherent knack for rhythm and visuals and pace. He always brings a very human core to things. Ant-Man, I think, is pretty good. I left feeling good, having enjoyed myself. I left with a lot of goodwill. It definitely won me over. It struggles to get off the ground a little bit, and it hits a little bit of turbulence along the way. But what it lacks in certain elements of finesse, it makes up for in just sort of the freshness and the wonder of, you know, the scope changes, you know, shrinking the world down and then bringing it back to normal size. Like, all that stuff is fun. The cast is really good. And of all the Marvel movies we had of late, it was the one that felt the most good-natured and the most fun. Because even Guardians of the Galaxy gets dark and kind of, and while this one does have all those thrill moments, I don't know, there's just something about the good-natured, you know, benevolence that underlies everything that was a nice change of pace and that I appreciated. So overall, this film's kind of scrappy, but in a way that's okay with me. In a way that almost even matches Scott Lang to me. So it's like, even though the film has its uneven and its patchy moments, it came together as a very pleasing and good-natured whole, and I do applaud them for that. Where I'm sitting at right now, I would be thrilled to watch it again. I really enjoyed myself, and I certainly hope that this is one of the more memorable ones to me. Just as a little side note, just something I noticed during the film, you know, a lot of the recent superhero movies, there are all these big places that they go, and the worlds are very sprawling, the scope is huge, and they're always traveling someplace different, and maybe it's just overexposure, but what I started to realize while I was watching this movie is I really did kind of miss seeing, I do appreciate a big budget movie like this that sticks to a few core characters and a few core locations and doesn't feel the need to go someplace exotic every 10 minutes or go to another giant cathedral-like building every 10 minutes. You know, it was nice to have something a little smaller in scale. No pun intended. And not that it's small either, just, you know, it was a nice change of pace from like, oh, we gotta go all these places, and now we're in space, and now we're in South Africa, and now we're on a flying boat, you know, like, it was nice. Obviously, stay for the credits. This one's got a couple of things you should look out for. I swear, by Phase 4, Marvel's just gonna have like 6 mid-post, you know, after credits stings. They're gonna like text you a video on the way home being like, even more after credits shit. But yeah, stay for all of the credits, let's just put it that way. So yeah, Ant-Man's a film. I really enjoyed myself. Let's talk about this. I mean, Marvel seems to be getting more sure-footed at introducing some of their more, you know, quirky titles that would have been harder to swallow at the beginning. So, you know, if you're a big comic book fan, we've had Guardians of the Galaxy now, we've had Ant-Man now. What's another quirky Marvel book you'd like to see brought to the big screen? Let's talk about that. Enlighten me, I'd love to know. So, until next time, folks, Ant-Man is the film. My name is Jerry. Cheers.